National Grid, how will it work with electric vehicles? As electric vehicles become more commonplace, the demand for electricity will increase, but those in charge of power delivery are ready. Battery electric vehicles aren't a flash in the pan, they're here to stay. From a life cycle perspective, considering all aspects from battery production to end of life, recent research argues that battery vehicles have the least impact on greenhouse gases and the overall environment compared to any other conventional or alternative powertrain type. This makes the importance of energy demand and adequate charging capacity more prominent than ever, and the organization that will ultimately have to strengthen this particular sector will be National Grid plc, at least for now. Whether or not there's enough capacity, the seemingly huge scale of infrastructure improvements, and delivering reliable enough public charging on a large enough scale, may have been the subject of discussion in the bar, and you can't avoid it, especially where misinformation is concerned. That said, National Grid still believes everything will be fine. After all, they should know what they are talking about. First, energy demand is now lower than it has been in years. The peak demand of the past few decades peaked at 62 gigawatts in 2002 and has now fallen to just over 50 gigawatts due to efficiency improvements. National Grid estimates that even with an overnight shift to electric vehicles, overall demand growth will only reach 10%. This year, demand has dropped by another 5% due to COVID measures, with National Grid ESO, electricity system operator, forecasting a peak demand of 44.7 gigawatts this winter. Due to the introduction of new UK legislation, all homes built from April 2022 must have chargers equipped with smart features to enable the local distribution network to control charging times to manage peak demand between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. The big change in response to the growing number of electric vehicles could be public charging. While it's often pointed out that most charging is done at home, it's not as comfortable for those who want to take advantage of rapidly increasing battery capacity and use their EVs over longer distances. Clearly, if battery electric vehicles replace conventional cars by 36 million by 2040, National Grid is now basing its estimates on the number. A large portion of them will be used for purposes far beyond local shopping or general commuting. A relatively inexpensive electric car costs around £35,000 and can actually travel more than 200 miles even on an 80% charge. National Grid believes a substandard public charging network will inhibit EV adoption due to range anxiety. According to its own data, 52% of drivers are concerned about driving any distance in an electric vehicle, and the solution is to eliminate that concern through a network of 50 superfast chargers in motorway service areas. Sites have been designated, up from 54 initially identified, and ultra-fast chargers will allow appropriately designated EVs to charge in 5 to 12 minutes. The idea is not just a theory, and has been in consultation with motorway service operators to assess what is needed and how the chargers will be connected to each network. The cost of a network of 50 charging points is estimated to be between £500 million and £1 billion. The bad news is that, as drivers might expect, ideas for paying for it include vehicle excise taxes, electricity bills, or some other form of taxation. Still, 20 years is a long time, and the next few years will depend in part on the UK government's approach to decarbonisation and net zero by 2050. Life cycle analysis, LCA, is now becoming the most accurate way to assess the carbon impact of any manufactured product, and considers every stage of the vehicle's life cycle, not just the use phase. Ricardo, together with partners E4 Tech and IFU, Heidelberg Institute for Energy and the Environment, has just completed a substantive study for the European Commission, providing the European Commission with the information it needs to develop emissions policies based on the impact of a car's entire life cycle from factory to scrap heap. The UK government's thinking still leans towards a deadline, for example, ban all internal combustion engines by 2030, which some see as a simplistic approach to a complex subject. But if that approach should change, so too will the pace of EV adoption. Either way, the transition to all-electric vehicles at some stage is now inevitable. The grid's transmission system is constantly being upgraded, and only ultra-fast charging is expected to require specific, EV-related upgrades. The work will initially focus on highways where heavy electrical systems already exist. With plug-in electric powertrains seemingly set to become the backbone of road transport sooner or later, and not just for passenger cars, but also for taxis, vans, and some trucks and buses, providing them with sustainable power is critical. The whole concept becomes moot if any significant amounts of greenhouse gases or regulated pollutants such as NOx are produced during its production. To work on the basis of LCA, vehicles need to be built using sustainable energy, fueled by sustainable energy, and ultimately processed using sustainable energy. Greenhouse gas emissions are known to do the same damage, whether from the tailpipe or elsewhere, And powering an electric vehicle with electricity from fossil fuels simply diverts regulated emissions from the tailpipe to the power station. But in the UK, things are looking good. Although often a joke, sustainable energy generation is growing rapidly, with 2019 being a record year, with sustainable energy sources such as wind, onshore and offshore, solar, plant biomass and hydro outpacing fossil fuels. In the first quarter of 2020, 47.8% of the UK's energy came from renewable sources, and in the second quarter it was a similar figure at 44.6%. That said, renewable energy production actually declined in 2021, and in the second quarter of this year, it only accounted for 37.3% of the total mix, a decline of 7.2%. This will no doubt undercut the government's ambitious plans to cut carbon emissions, including raising offshore wind power from 10 gigawatts today to 40 gigawatts by 2030, enough to power all UK homes, including any EV wall boxes they might have. Vehicle-to-grid charging isn't a crazy idea, and it's already being trialed in the UK and Europe. The idea is that when your EV is plugged in, a special two-way V2G charger can draw energy from the EV's battery when balancing the network is needed during peak demand. Trials so far have been limited to commercial fleets, and this is one of the latest trials by Nissan and E.ON. The companies predict that E.ON fleet customers can save the equivalent of the energy needed to drive 10,000 miles per year, 308 pounds. The data assumes a 40 kWh Nissan Leaf, 168-mile WLTP cruising range, consumes 0.238 kWh per mile, and has an energy cost of 12.93p/kW/h, 1 unit. It's still early days, and similar plans for domestic customers have yet to be announced. One factor that affects home use is cost and space. Today, special V2G chargers are bulkier than traditional home wall chargers, and government subsidies cover a significant portion of the cost. A full switch to renewable energy will be crucial if electric vehicles are to make sense. It's easy to assume that renewables surged to almost half of the UK's total energy supply at the start of the year, mainly from wind, which is true, and onshore and offshore wind does make up the lion's share, but that's not the whole story. Government figures list 12 installed forms of renewable energy, ranging from shoreline wave and tidal energy, which is still in its infancy and produces only 22 megawatts of shoreline wave and tidal energy, to onshore wind with a maximum installed capacity of 48,487 megawatts. Some people in between might be surprised. Onshore wind with 14,143 megawatts is followed by solar photovoltaics, then offshore wind, and in fourth place is plant biomass with 4,551 megawatts. Given that it has been around since the Victorian era, the contribution from large hydropower is surprisingly modest at 1,473 megawatts, with energy from waste and landfill gas in particular not far behind at 1,337 megawatts and 1,055 megawatts, respectively. However, we can all contribute to renewable energy. Sewage sludge digestion contributed 247 megawatts and anaerobic digestion contributed 559 megawatts. Bioenergy and waste accounted for an impressive 14.7% of the UK's total energy consumption in the second quarter of 2020. One benefit of EVs is seen as having more options where you refuel without having to go to the petrol station forecourt. The Electric Vehicle Energy Task Force's report Powering Our Electric Vehicle Transition states that while fast charging networks are considered critical to EV adoption, the Consumer, Vehicle and Energy Integration Trial, CVEI, shows participants choose to charge at home and pay for electricity, although you can use your local free public charging station. The vast majority of consumers in the trial said they preferred smart charging, but that doesn't explain the millions of users who will be parked on the street. If most EV drivers use smart charging, they can save money while reducing the load on the grid. Peak and off-peak tariffs also create a herd effect that creates stability in the system. When people recharge and how they charge will have an impact on stabilizing grid demand. Please listen to our podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Amazon Music, Audible or YouTube. www.anchor.fm/Daniel Fearns. If could also share the podcast episode and subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel Electric Vehicle News Bite Size, it would be very much appreciated. Enjoyed this article? Then please read £285 million of renewable energy support program launched. Photo by Laura Penwell on Pexels.com.